Yeah, guys.
The Honorable, the Speaker.
Before I call upon the Minister of Finance, you have 4 more minutes left. I just want to remind members of this chamber of the provisions of Standing Order 55-4, which is under the caption Gross Disorder. And gross disorder, according to that standing order, includes actual disorder, acts in a manner that displays flagrant disobedience to the ruling of the chair, or acts in any other way that amounts to serious detriment to the dignity or orderly procedure of the House. And order the standing order 55-5, which deals with the power of the chair to deal with gross disorderly behavior. Just want to remind members that all standing orders are in effect. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, during the 1-hour suspension, the government sent the opposition a tracked version of the bill, plus the amendments based on consultation with stakeholders and based on the advertisement, which you only saw this morning in the newspapers. And having seen it at 5 a.m. this morning, we started to work on it and prepared these amendments and this track change bill, because we are serious about protecting the interest of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to point out, Madam Speaker, that I came to this Parliament on the 9th of September with this legislation. This is now the 23rd of September. The opposition has had sight of this bill for more than 2 weeks. And therefore, it is unacceptable that after 14 days, the opposition cannot produce a single proposed amendment to this bill. We sat in the committee room and they chose not to come and discuss with us proposed amendments to the bill. Realizing that they were not coming, Madam Speaker.
Member for Caroni Central. This is the last warning that I will give for the entire sitting.
Madam Speaker, we are recognizing that they had no intention of dealing with the bill or the legislation, and they were simply playing politics. We sent them a track copy of the bill and the amendments. Madam Speaker, I want to reiterate that the government has 23 votes. All 23 votes are ready to vote on this bill. Even one of our members who was ill and has come back, the member for... Even one of our members who was absent because he was ill has come back to vote for this bill. So I want to reiterate that all 23 PNM votes are here to vote for this bill. If it is not a complicated bill, it is exactly the same bill that they drafted. The Bankers Association has said there's nothing in here that would cause any concern, and therefore if the opposition chooses not to vote on this bill today, then they know exactly what they are doing and why they are putting this country in such a jeopardy. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister of Finance, do you beg to move?
Oh, I beg to move.
Is this a point of order? No. Okay. Honourable members, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Repeal the Tax Information Exchange Agreements Act and replace it with a new Tax Information Exchange Agreements Act which would make provision for the implementation of agreements between Trinidad and Tobago and other states, providing for the exchange of information for the purposes of taxation, to validate the sharing of personal information held by the Board of Inland Revenue or financial institutions, and for related purposes, be now read a second time. Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I listened attentively to the Honorable Minister of Finance, the member for Diego Martin, Northeast. And I wondered whether that was the same Minister of Finance who told this country that this bill was going to a joint select committee after discussions with the opposition. Madam Speaker, and he had the gall to adjourn the House, suspend the House for an hour in order to present the opposition with track changes, which we got at 2:58 p.m. Madam Speaker, they're not serious about this legislation. I am always of the view, Madam Speaker, that politics is not a game. And what we have had demonstrated on this piece of legislation is a series of gamesmanship. In my view, politics is about how do you bring about consensus to deal with the large questions of the day. How do you create the common ground to bring about a resolution in the society? I cannot fathom what is the end game of the government. It is clear that either they have an undertaking by the American government, the Department of Treasury, for an extension of the period, and that is why there is a change in the tone and the content of the Minister of Finance. This is the same Minister of Finance, Madam Speaker, who in the Guardian newspaper of Tuesday, September 13, had this to say. And I quote a Richard Lord article, Business Guardian. Trinidad and Tobago will seek extension from the United States government on the September 30th deadline for the implementation of FATCA. Following talks at the Parliament building, Finance Minister Colm Imbert told reporters, what we are going to do is speak to the U.S. Treasury to see if we can get an extension of time to allow a proper joint select committee session to take place after the budget. He said he was confident the request will be granted, that government had agreed to facilitate the opposition with a proper joint select committee, not a rush job and not a piecemeal job. This is the Minister of Finance. This is the Minister of Finance. Madam Speaker, when in trying economic times, you begin to question the credibility of the Minister of Finance in an undertaking of this nature, come today in a piecemeal, rush fashion, seeking to shove down the throats of the opposition and the people of this country. And he has indicated that the stakeholders will be given the opportunity. Now the banking fraternity, Madam Speaker, has sent 13 proposed amendments, and it is dated September 13th. This debate, and I just want to, for purposes of the chronology, this debate started on, the bill was circulated on the 5th of September. And you have the banking community on September 14th, in the newspaper of September 14th. The president of the Banking Association, the Bankers Association, indicated that they had seen the IGA, but not the local draft legislation. Madam Speaker, perhaps we ought to backtrack a bit because the minister in his presentation attempted to really kind of sort of create a pillar between the IGA and the bill. Madam Speaker, in 5th December 2014, the IGA was initialed by Minister of Finance then, Larry Howard. On the 19th of August, it was signed by the current minister, 2016, by the current Minister of Finance. That is established. On the 5th September, the government sought to crystallize the IGA into a bill which they laid in Parliament and for debate on the 9th. The minister makes a big song and dance, the Minister of Finance, makes a big song and dance about the fact that the Chief Parliamentary Council had a draft bill in place and that draft bill is the bill that was laid in Parliament on 5th September. Madam Speaker, when the technocrats in the legal department of the Chief Parliamentary Council, they draft a bill, it goes through a process. The process is that it goes with the line minister and his department and then goes to, so from the ministry, after the draft, and they will be participating in the draft, it goes to the Legislative Review Committee. The Legislative Review Committee will then look at that bill, and after it passes through that legislative thoroughness of the Legislative Review Committee, it will then go to Cabinet. And from Cabinet may indicate that we should have the views of the various stakeholders. So this bill that they talk about, this Tax Information Exchange Bill 2016, did not go through that process with the stakeholders in this country. The fact of the matter, if it was a draft in our time, it remained our draft. It never engaged the Legislative Review Committee, never came to Cabinet, and never moved beyond that. So to say that is a level of dishonesty, Madam Speaker, a level of dishonesty. And I begin to question the credibility of the Minister of Finance. So when the debate started, Madam Speaker, and just for purposes of chronology, on the 9th of September, the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, and a lot of what is carried in the ad in the newspaper today, she indicated that, raised the concerns in the debate on the 9th of September and indicated because of the lack of consultation, at the time, they ought to have been a joint select committee. That's right, yeah. And then subsequently, a meeting was convened on Monday the 11th with the opposition and the government. And we said the first thing we have to establish really is the question of process. How do we deal with the question of process, and then subsequently we deal with the substantive issues arising out of this bill before us? And the process we agreed upon was that there ought to be set up a joint select committee that will be able to sit and to complete the exercise before and in time for the passage of the bill on September 30th. That was the agreement.
That was 14 days ago.
Madam Speaker, I am reminded, that was 14 days ago. There was an undertaking. There was an undertaking. It was publicly announced. But what went into the mortar other than the pestle? It was the arrival of the Honorable Member for San Fernando West at the debate on the 13th of September. At the debate on the 13th of September, Madam Speaker, in which his dark shadows cast over Diego Martin West, the Honorable Member for San Fernando West proceeded to regale this House with a series of utterances on the bill that had no relation to the bill before us, but had all relevance to the IG. He mentioned not one section, not one clause of the Tax Information Exchange Bill 2016, but went on to talk about reciprocity and who have mall here and who have whatever elsewhere. That is what he went on a tirade. He was utterly, probably didn't have sight of the bill at that time, but came, because when I asked him about the bill, when I asked him about the bill, he said that,
He just landed.
and he had just landed from a CFATIF meeting in Jamaica, I understand.
Yeah.
But Madam Speaker, he said, and I quote from page 55 of the Hansard, unedited version, the reciprocity, that is a key factor, is a key point to be remembered in this debate. So what it is, reciprocity, this is what the Honorable Member for Diego Martin Northeast, the Minister of Finance, had to say about reciprocity. And I quote, Madam Speaker, from the Daily Express article by Rhea Tate of Wednesday, 14 September 2016. The agreement speaks about reciprocity. The legislation, and I'm quoting the Honorable Minister of Finance. The agreement speaks about reciprocity. The legislation we brought does not speak of reciprocity. And this is what the Minister of Finance is saying. So what the Honorable Attorney General saying reciprocity, that people frail, and it was picked up by his leader at the public meeting in St. Joseph, and I'll come to deal with that subsequently. You see? There, and I intend to quote again, Madam Speaker, from the same article. There is nothing in there to make Trinidad and Tobago citizens who have accounts in the United States declare that to the authority here. It will be up to the U.S. when they deem it appropriate to pass a law in Congress that will require the U.S. Treasury to report to a Board of Inland Revenue. So they sit next to each other in this parliament. They obviously did not sit in the LRC together, because one is saying reciprocity. The AAG is saying reciprocity. Granted that he makes mistakes with respect to privacy, and now he's making another mistake with respect to reciprocity. And the Minister of Finance, who is piloting the legislation, says no reciprocity. Madam Speaker, that is what is taking place. And then on the basis of reciprocity, we have, which is reciprocity, the Honorable Prime Minister, with the shadow cast by the member for San Fernando West. You know, taking bait, says at a meeting in constituency of St. Joseph, PM is jailed afraid. And basically said, the opposition UNC is mortally afraid that the money, if it's stolen, hid abroad, will be discovered once the FATCA legislation is passed, hence his refusal to support the current bill. If there is no reciprocity, then what is the basis for your utterance? Absolutely none whatsoever. But I'll come to that, you see, because he already gave the Honorable Member for Arima a mandate to revise history. He went to revise history on the Marlborough Accord in London on the basis of our independence. I want to tell you, Honorable Prime Minister, I expected better than that from you, having regard to the demographics of this society. But I want to tell you that Surin Kapildev is not Rudranath Kapildev. Because you see, Madam Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister was making the point that the opposition is unwilling to support this bill because it has a history of obstructionism. And we are saying, and he related that to the time of the Independence Accord. And we are saying that we have legitimate concerns about this bill, and that therefore those concerns are not concerns that you can just dismiss. And I want to refer him to the real father of the nation, Dr. Eric Williams, History of the People of Trinidad and Tobago. I know my friend, the Honorable Member for Rapuch, Rudy Munilal, says Eric Williams is the real father of the nation, but the current Prime Minister wants to father the nation. My Honorable Speaker, this is what Dr. Eric Williams had to say with respect to the utterance of where because the Honorable Member is saying that the opposition, even at independence, was obstructing. And this is what Dr. Eric Williams from the History of the People of Trinidad and Tobago had to say. The parliamentary opposition, led by Dr. Rudranath Kapildeo, called for greater safeguards in a number of fields with particular reference to the judiciary, appointments to the public service, the control of elections, the protection of human rights, and the provision for consultation with the opposition. The Independence Conference opened in London in Marlborough House on 28 May 1962 and ended on June 8, a great success for the two major parties and for the country as a whole. Madam Speaker, so when the Prime Minister seeks to demonize the opposition because they have legitimate concerns about the nature of this bill, we must be able to say, take that with a pinch of salt.
Oh, a handful.
Madam Speaker, so we have moved from where the Minister of Finance was conciliatory, where he was embracing the capacity for change,
This meeting, the Prime Minister also, that's what you're saying.
where he was embracing the opposition with a view to bringing about good legislation in the country. And what has happened now? There has been a change of tone, one of bellicosity and one of belligerence, and a kind of truculence emerging. You see, Madam Speaker, and I go back to the basic point I was making, that you cannot play games with the people. You cannot create the conditions in which people feel we are playing games. This society is in real trouble economically. The society is... Madam Speaker, and that is therefore why we take a very serious view of this piece of legislation. But there seems to be a lack of direction, a level of uncertainty as to how the government proceeding with this piece of legislation. That is why I ask whether or not they have received from the Department of Treasury the undertaking to extend the time.
They were not informed.
And they should tell the country that, even if they will not tell the opposition. And I quote from the Express once more, Thursday, 22nd September. Rowley, and I quote, said, if when the Parliament meets tomorrow, that is today, it was possible for the Joint Select Committee to be established and to meet on the bill with the mandate to bring the bill back to the Parliament for debate and passage before the September 30th deadline, it will be done. If that is feasible under the current standing orders, it would be done, but it may not be. So as of now, September 30th deadline may not be attainable, and if that is so, then we are at the mercy of the United States to do with us as they will. And so is that the kind of approach you take? You don't give us certainty of direction. There is no clear policy direction. There is no engagement to build a consensus as to what you want. You see, Madam Speaker, the Honourable Minister indicated that he read in the newspaper certain considerations, the advertisement placed by the opposition, and then he proceeded to dismiss a lot of those considerations of the newspaper. Madam Speaker, we have serious concerns, which I'll put into the record on Clause 5, Clause 6, Clause 7, Clause 8, Clause 21, and Clause 25, inter alia. Madam Speaker, this is the opposition position. Clause 5. The President may by order declare a tax information agreement specified in the order to be a declared agreement for the purposes of this Act. I know you read it. The opposition position, Madam Speaker, for purposes of the record. This is not required by the intergovernmental agreement with the United States. It gives blanket approval for any future agreement signed by any government to become law without disclosure, debate, and parliamentary approval. These types of agreements breach privacy rights. Apart from the potential to affect privacy rights, these agreements can give to the government or a nominated entity or person the power to affect significantly the property rights of citizens. It can give the government, whether it be PNM or the UNC or whatever configuration that may emerge, the power to freeze people's bank accounts, to confiscate property or the proceeds of accounts, or impose penalties on persons without any input of sanction of the Parliament. This, the opposition says, is a power no government should have without the approval or scrutiny of the Parliament. It is our view that the granting of such a power may well be in breach of the rule of law and the Constitution if not made subject to parliamentary approval and liable to be struck down. Right. Madam Speaker, it is therefore essential that they may be made subject to an affirmative resolution of the Parliament before enactment into law. And it is also noted by virtue of Section 80 of the Constitution, President means the Cabinet. Yes. Now, the Honourable Member for Diego Martin Northeast, the Minister of Finance, said that they do not want any affirmative resolution. Why? Because they will take pressure from the opposition. Look at pressure they're getting right now. An affirmative resolution means that the matter comes up for the scrutiny of the Parliament, and all you require is a simple majority. So why don't you want the scrutiny of this Parliament? A simple majority is required for an affirmative resolution. And when you come to the Parliament, you embrace the public. Part of the problem as we face the economic hard times because of the drop in oil prices and gas is that the failure to embrace the people. We cannot continue the alienation of the people from the governing process in this country. And we are saying, Madam Speaker, in order to embrace the people, give them the right and their representatives the right by way of affirmative resolution in Clause 5. Clause 6. The minister or any person authorized by him shall ensure that effect is given to every declared agreement. Subsection 2, where the minister authorizes any person under subsection 1, he may give general directions to such person as to the performance of his function under this act, and such person shall comply with any directions given. It's mandatory. So, Madam Speaker, we are saying that the intergovernmental agreement with the U.S. does not require this. And, you know, I heard the minister talk about it there since 1989. 1989, clause 29 of clause 29 of the current bill, Madam Speaker, seeks to validate all the actions done since 1989 to now.
26 years.
26 years of illegal activity. So 27 years.
It came into effect the following year.
And I want to read clause 29.
89, but took effect in 90.
All acts.
26 years.
Excuse me, I would like to hear the member for Chaguanas West. Please continue.
Very interesting.
Clause 29 says, all acts or things purportedly done in good faith by the board pursuant to the former act prior to the coming into operation of this act shall be deemed to have been lawfully and validly done to the extent it would have been lawfully and validly done if the board had the power to do so under the former act. This is
26 years.
This is a 26-year validation. This is a catch-all basket. What is in the content of that basket that we are validating? That's right. What it is. And what it is you want to say because it was so in 1989 and this one voted for it or that one voted for it, it must be so now in 2016?
26 years. 27 years.
27 years. So, Madam Speaker, that argument really runs counter to the reality of the society today. So, we are saying Clause 6, Madam Speaker, is not required by the IG.
That's right.
The effect of this clause is to open the door for political interference and victimization. This is a serious concern. More so having regard to the recent utterances, vitriolic utterances by the Prime Minister in St. Joseph. There is an absence of qualification for an appointed person, and so this clause effectively allows for anyone to be appointed to be bestowed with this power. There is no criteria. It could be
Bestowed.
It could be a politically appointed hatchet man. Hatchet is right? Put in this position to target political opponents. Madam Speaker, we raised this concern with respect to the appointment of the director of the SSA. What you are seeing is a pattern of behavior by this administration where powers that should be vested in independent persons and authorities are being transformed into political functionaries that could be used to carry out the political will of any administration. What you are creating is political ciphers. They do not have a mind of their own. It allows for the legitimizing of any arbitrary exercise of state power. We in the opposition say, Madam Speaker, firstly, there should be a minimum threshold requirement for the persons who these powers could be delegated to. And secondly, there should be safeguards in the legislation to ensure that the powers conferred are not exercised arbitrarily, capriciously, or in a manner not in accordance with the law. We are of the view, Madam Speaker, that the minister should not be given this power and should be replaced by the BIR as obtained previously. Clause 7. Clause 7, Madam Speaker. And I quote, the minister or a person authorized by him has for the purpose of giving effect to a declared agreement all the powers that he would have if we were acting generally for the purpose of or for any particular purpose specified in any act that confers powers on the person. Any power under subsection 1 is exercisable, notwithstanding that the circumstances, if any, necessary under that act for the exercise of the power may not have arisen, and subject to subsection 1, the provisions of that act shall apply to and in relation to the exercise of that power for the purpose of giving effect to a declared agreement as if the power was exercised for the purpose of that act. Subsection 3. The minister or person authorized by him may, in accordance with the declared agreement, provide any information obtained by him under this or any other act, and B, request and receive any information required by him for the purpose of any act. Madam Speaker, this is unacceptable. It is not required by the intergovernmental agreement. Why is it finding itself crystallized in our domestic law? It gives wide and intrusive powers to the minister-politician to operate outside the law in circumstances required by the law. And therefore, Madam Speaker, this section allows for the minister to defeat the legislative intent and purpose of the legislation. I know of no other clause present in any legislation that gives such a power, and there can be none because the nature of the power that is conferred is contrary to the rule of law. Madam Speaker, this clause allows the minister to exercise powers where the preconditions for the exercise of the powers has not yet arisen. For example, for the purpose of this act, is to allow for the authorities to prevent tax evasion. The fundamental rule of law principles would dictate that before the minister can make a request for information regarding any citizen, there must be prima facie evidence that satisfies some.
You're entitled to an extension of 15 minutes. Do you intend to utilize that?
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
may
I intend
proceed.
to utilize it. The fundamental rule of law, Madam Speaker, would dictate that before the minister can make a request for information regarding any citizen, there must be a prima facie evidence that satisfies some threshold criteria, no matter how low that person is involved in tax evasion. It is only then, and only then, that the minister could seek to make a request for information from the U.S. authorities. What this clause does is to allow for the minister to exercise the powers to make a request, notwithstanding the circumstances, if any, necessary under the Act for the exercise of that power. And, Madam Speaker, even a normal police officer have to get a search warrant before he goes into your home. This will allow the authorities to go into your account without any threshold whatsoever. Madam Speaker, Clause 8. When Clause 8 is read with other provisions in the bill, it allows the minister to get around the privacy protections of any other law apart from those named. Madam Speaker, if the government intends to legislate to breach privacy protection, they must state the specific laws that would be affected and should not use a blanket phrase of any other law. It's a fundamental principle that you cannot seek to breach fundamental rights by a side wind. Madam Speaker, this clause allows for all safeguards present to be bypassed without consequence. Clause 21, Madam Speaker, this relates to establishing procedures for automatic sharing of sensitive personal information. These procedures should be disclosed, debated, and approved by Parliament in order to ensure proper safeguards are provided for. The MOU should therefore be subject to affirmative resolution of Parliament. We stand, when you're dealing with matters of this nature, when you're dealing with matters where you deal with other states, you have to stand for transparency and accountability as you seek to protect the rights of citizens. Clause 25, Madam Speaker, provides for the minister may by order, where the parties modify the IG or its annexes in Schedule 2, amend the IG or its annexes contained in Schedule 2. This gives the minister blanket approval to make laws and any future changes to the IG without disclosure, debate, and approval of Parliament. The future changes could affect privacy and other rights. Any other order, it is our recommendation, should be subject to the affirmative resolution of the Parliament. Madam Speaker, so these are some of the major concerns we have. And when we look,
Then the bankers have their own problems.
and we have also, Madam Speaker, the bankers have 13 amendments. We do not have sight of what the securities industry indicated, the TTSCC. But it is clear that there is need for a consultative approach and to work through this thing, the bill with the technical personnel. But, Madam Speaker, it is not the intention of the opposition to allow this government to ride roughshod over the rights of citizens of this country. You have within the American system the financial data privacy within the United States. When there was a Supreme Court case which said that you did not have the privacy of financial data, the American Congress moved quickly to pass the Right to Financial Privacy Act. So what you're seeking to do through a series data protection, a series amendments to the Financial Institutions Act, you're seeking to eliminate that. And therefore, you are not even taking into consideration that whereas the Americans, and this will affect Americans in Trinidad, that category of persons, those who have bank accounts, those who have equity interests, those who have insurance, that they have a right to privacy in the American system. And you are seeking to eliminate that right. You have no question of notification. How in this day and age you can send information and there is no right to be notified that your information is going to the United States. When they are in the American system, they have the right to be notified. Madam Speaker?
But we have that in the Income Tax Act.
Yes.
Section
But it is available in our Income Tax Act.
160 and 170.
Madam Speaker, and the minister made no point on this occasion about the whole question of de-risking. Made no point. I mean, the Honorable Attorney General,
No privacy.
well, the Honorable Attorney General, of course, in his presentation, he will sucranize, but I want to say that our banking sector, our financial services sector is well prepared to deal with this legislation. They have all been registered with their global intermediary numbers. All the banking, some 81 institutions in this country, what they are seeking, they cannot convey the information because they have, if they do so, they will breach the right to privacy. But Madam Speaker, it is our considered view that unless the government takes into the embrace the concerns of the opposition and treat with them in a manner that is appropriate, not in a dismissive manner as done by the member for Diego Martin Northeast in his presentation. Because the role of FATCA is that we are seeking to link with the American system to avoid tax evaders in this local jurisdiction, this country. When I speak as a patriot. Madam Speaker, so that you're seeking to avoid, we know in the American system, tax evasion is a serious problem, and that therefore, what we have here, we have indicated to the government our position in this matter. We recognize the need for the FATCA. We were willing to work throughout the whole period to meet the September 30th deadline. And therefore, Madam Speaker, it is our hope that whether at the committee stage, that the government will embrace the opportunity of working with the opposition for the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago and in the public interest. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we're here on the second round, having used Standing Order 79.3 to preserve the business of the last session of Parliament into the second session to discuss this bill. I'll cut straight to the chase. Madam Speaker, we, on the 2nd of September, met with the opposition to talk about crime and other issues and cooperation between government and opposition.
3 weeks ago.
We had that meeting 3 weeks ago, and at that meeting specifically raised with the leader of the opposition and her team that the FATCA bill, the FATCA issue was a burning issue. True to form, we told her that during the course of the next week we would send information, and so we did. We came to the Parliament on the 9th. We met on the Monday following the 9th. We met on the Wednesday following, and we're back here again today. The opposition has, in the entire delivery given by my learned colleague Chaguanas West, put forward a position of reading into the record a statement by the leader of the opposition. And I want to ask a question today. I would like to know, and I'm prepared to give way to Chaguanas West, to ask who paid for this statement by the leader of the opposition. And if he's willing to answer, I'll give way. And the reason why I ask that question,
thank you. I spoke with the clerk of the House, whether the vote of the office of the leader of the opposition can pay to put out the position of the opposition with respect to the bill.
Thank you.
And, okay. Okay.
We have just found out that taxpayers' dollars were used to pay for a full-page advertisement coming out of the lips of the leader of the opposition. Let me tell you why I raised this. Because 3 weeks ago, every single day, we have been talking FATCA in Trinidad and Tobago. The advertisement says at the top of it, the opposition pledged and pledges to work around the clock to secure consensus on the bill to ensure its timely passage. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 clauses only identified, now read into the record for the second time, 5, 6, 7, 8, 21 and 25. Third time now mentioned. This publication, paid for by tax-paying dollars, identified issues. As Attorney General, I spotted this publication. The CPC's department went to work, and we had to guess what the opposition wanted, because we received no specifics on the line by line. Now, we've heard in that publication that the stakeholders were not consulted. And I'd like to point this out. The stakeholders that have direct relevance are the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, the Board of Inland Revenue, the Trinidad and Tobago Securities Exchange Commission, and the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago. They are the major stakeholders. The fact is that the citizens of this country, being represented by their members of parliament, have their representations before us. The Minister of Finance has read into the record the written correspondence coming from the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago by way of their letter dated September 13, 2016. And they say, and let me quote, the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago is pleased to support the passage of Tax Information Exchange Bill 2016. And they provide suggested amendments. The Trinidad and Tobago Securities Exchange Commission also writes by way of email from their legal counsel, Astrea Douglas, and provides certain amendments. These are sent to the opposition and to the government. Now, Madam Speaker, I say this because consultation happened with the Central Bank, with the Board of Inland Revenue, Bankers Association has put in. And I'm hearing Siparia say, having learned a lesson not to speak first, sends in Chaguanas West. I'm glad that lessons are learned here, you know. Because when a leader does not lift the whip, puts down a position, and then is surprised that the debate is adjourned when the whip is not lifted. So not a man could say no to what the leader has said. They have finally learned that lesson. Chaguanas West comes now and says, listen, this position requires consultation. But Madam Speaker, up to now, we have issue identification, not a drop of contribution by way of suggested amendments. But Madam Speaker, what are the amendments? Clause 5, Clause 6, Clause 7, Clause 8, Clause 21, Clause 25. 6 clauses which the Minister of Finance has now put onto the record, having spoken first in piloting as to exactly how we propose to treat with them. 3 of them are now entirely off the table. 1 of them, because we accepted the removal of the term minister. We're now down to 3 issues by the opposition's own reflection. But Madam Speaker, what we did, and I continue to do this as Attorney General, is we don't only provide schedule of amendments to go that don't make sense, we continue to provide marked up track change documents so that they can be put into context. Their advertisement says that they're prepared to work around the clock, but there's a huge omission to that advertisement. We're not prepared to work for free in the Parliament chamber on a suspension for 1 hour to sit down and talk about 3 remaining
Madam Standing Order
clauses.
referring to imputing improper motives.
Madam Speaker,
48. Standing Order 48.
Take your seat.
Excuse me?
You out of
Excuse me, please. I'm on my legs, and I would like all that crosstalk to stop. I don't agree with the objection. Please continue.
yes, Madam Speaker. I'll link what I mean by for free. $10,000 per full-page ad is what it costs on average to publish a full-page ad. If you call it today for tomorrow, it can go up to $30,000, Madam Speaker. We had the ability, having suspended the debate for 1 hour, track change document, proposed amendments, 3 of the issues coming off the table clean. We have the ability to sit down as grown individuals to agree with the duty to talk about FATCA under your own obligation that you're prepared to do so and work around the clock. But that is false advertising. And that is false advertising, now called to be duty of patriot. You know, Madam Speaker, being half Iraqi, I might tell you I know a lot about patriots. Because there were a number of Patriot missiles dropped on Iraq which caused a lot of destruction. And the only kind of patriot that I could think about must be a missile that the Honorable Member Chaguanas West was talking about. Because, Madam Speaker, we find it quite interesting, you know. The opposition can't come today to sit for 1 hour to talk about 3 issues. Madam Speaker, let me remind the honorable members present through you and the national community. We have the AmCham talking as an entity. In fact, the person who speaks for AmCham is the son of Caroni Central, saying to Trinidad and Tobago, this is not complicated. Please sit down and discuss it. The deadline is upon us. The Bankers Association is saying the deadline is upon us. The SEC recognizes the deadline is upon us. The radio waves, the average businessman. Everybody in Trinidad and Tobago recognizes there's a deadline. Taxpayers have now paid for a written statement to say we're prepared to work around the clock, say for the hour in Parliament and here. And Madam Speaker, we can't get a drop of contribution for specific amendment. Now, Madam Speaker, if there are 3 issues left on the table, the call by Chaguanas West is now, let's have process. There's a process to this. We need to go to a joint select committee, and we need to talk. And we must agree upon process first before we talk about substance. And substance will come after we agree with process. Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago has told the politicians, please sit down and do the work. We are paying you. All of us receive emoluments as members of Parliament. The opposition says, listen, we have not had a response from certain stakeholders. You now know that that's not true. The government says we do not have a response from the United States of America. Unless we hear otherwise, the deadline of the 30th applies. There is urgency in the economy. There's urgency in the international arrangements. They produce a publication using tax-paying dollars to identify issues as opposed to specifics. They refuse to come to the government and talk with us and go through the line-by-line items. The opposition and the government together have the majority to pass special majority, both houses of Parliament, the Senate and the House. There is no need for a joint select committee to agree upon 3 remaining issues which we could have sat down over the last hour and had dealt with. Instead, Madam Speaker, we hear Chaguanas West now occupying the erstwhile seat of Oropuch East and two of them talking about good friends, Oropoch East instead just balls out Sukaranization. I want to put on the record something. Sukaranization is a reference by the opposition to my grandfather, maternal grandfather, Lionel Sukaran. I noticed none of the honorable members opposite could talk about their own grandparents. But instead, they wish to reflect on my parentage. I am very proud to be the grandson of Lionel Frank Sukaran. And I am very proud to certify that when Dr. Rowley spoke about the Marlborough sabotage, that growing up in our family, my grandfather who attended the Marlborough conference told me chapter and verse of how Kapil Deo, as the Honorable Prime Minister referred to him on the platform, not calling a first name, the newspapers putting in Surin as opposed to Rudranath, that Kapil Deo nearly saw our country without independence. That is a fact. So, Madam Speaker, brass tacks are quite simple. The legislation requires the opposition and the government to cooperate to agree upon three remaining issues. One of them is whether we are going to have a validation of the 1989 to 2016 in clause 29 of the bill, acts of the Board of Inland Revenue in issuing spontaneous information to the United States of America. That's issue one. Issue two is whether we have affirmative resolution in respect of other agreements which are to come through to the Parliament. The third one is a replication of issue number two, because it's raised twice in respect of the clauses. We have said that there would be an undue fetter to the Board of Inland Revenue to stymie their work by allowing politicians to interfere by way of objection. We say that that is in keeping with the normalcy of the law, and in those circumstances, we are of the view that the President should have the authority to declare agreements. Secondly, Madam Speaker, there is always the ability of any member of Parliament to raise a motion in relation to something which is standing in society. So it isn't that Parliament does not have scrutiny. No. You can raise any form of inquiry, private members' motion, you can raise petitions. So, Madam Speaker, the fact is that that is just not true. Let us deal with the 1989 to 2016 validation. 1989, Bohendranath Tiwari, member of the National Alliance for Reconstruction, now Honorable Member for Karani Central. Dr. Suraj Ratan Rambachan, member of the NAR, now member for Tabakit, sat in an NAR government and passed the legislation in 1989. They then passed through, together with Chaguanas West, with Siparia, with a number of other members present now, Oropoch East, through the United National Congress in the period 1995 to 2000, in 2000 to 2001, and then 2010 to 2015. There was an NAR government, a UNC government, a PNM government, a UNC government, a PNM government. And Madam Speaker, the spontaneous issuance of information by the United States of America has stood as a fact in Trinidad and Tobago now for 26 years. All of a sudden, the position is that there's something wrong with that. What is being hidden? This matter was considered by the cabinet of Siparia on 4 occasions, because I am including not only the note coming to cabinet, but the minute and the confirmation in respect of the May and October 2013 notes that came to the Kamla Prasad Bisesa government. So, Madam Speaker, is there a standing order? Is there a standing order?
Member for Superior.
You are not
Members for Superior.
Parliament.
Member.
You are not speaking truth. This Parliament. Lie.
Member for Superior. I now rule that I constitute your conduct to amount to gross disorder in accordance with Standing Order 55-4, and I ask you to withdraw from the chamber for the rest of the sitting.
Absolute nonsense.
Member for Princestown, I also ask you to withdraw from the chamber for the rest of the sitting.
Madam Speaker, it is
Nonsense in this house.
Madam Speaker, perhaps the government ought to definitely put on the record now, because the cameras would be on the speaker, that the opposition is currently walking out of the chamber. Because you have ruled on unruly conduct by no less a person than a past Prime Minister, the current leader of the opposition, where there is no explanation whatsoever from the opposition as to why they cannot sit down and do the people's business today on 3 issues. Madam Speaker, there can be no greater disrespect to Trinidad and Tobago than the opposition's walkout today. All of them.
Because of misconduct.
Because of misconduct. A gross dereliction of duty.
Gross disorder.
A shame to Trinidad and Tobago, as we see now, as the members walk out unable to identify a single line of amendment, unable to propose any form of solution, having spent tax-paying dollars as they have right now to publish issues. You see, Madam Speaker, today we offer them the opportunity to continue a full debate, to go right down to the wire on a decision which Trinidad and Tobago relies upon. They put a published advertisement to say that they're prepared to work around the clock.
And they walk out.
I want to say now, Madam Speaker, I am convinced that the opposition always intended to walk out of this parliament. I am convinced that that is what they intended to do.
Graceful.
I am convinced that that is the case. They did not expect us to come and start a debate willing to take them at their word, their published, tax-paying, paid-for word to do the business of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, I submit most humbly to you, Madam Speaker, that this is a tragedy to the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago. It is a disgrace to our country. The Banking Association will no doubt be taking note. The people of Trinidad and Tobago who will face the gun of not being able to transact business via credit card, via monies, that this would be problematic for all of us, Madam Speaker. This is a shame on the opposition and on the country. Madam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I now beg to move that this House do now adjourn to Friday, the 30th of September at 1:30 p.m. when the budget will be presented.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn to Friday, the 30th of September at 2016 at 1:30 p.m. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned to Friday, the 30th of September 2016 at 1:30 p.m.
Follow the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago on